It's not all about power. And in fact, if you try to govern your relationships based on power, your true relationships, you will fail. So imagine that your wife, let's say, you're going to just use power to interact with her. Well, try it and see what happens. You know, she's going to be miserable and she's going to be resentful for sure. And maybe she's got more power than you when push comes to shove. Who the hell knows? Women aren't that easy to oppress. And so they have their own bag of tricks, that's for sure. And so, but at minimum, you're going to be setting yourself up for a loveless relationship based on mutual suspicion. And then imagine you tried to use power on your kids. Well, now and then you might have to use discipline. You might have to lay out the game rules, which isn't the same as like constraining them with oppression. But if your fundamental relationship with your kids is one of dominance, you're just a tyrant. And then if you try using that on your friends, well, first of all, you won't have any friends. The best you'll ever manage is henchmen, and they'll only be around you because they think they can get something out of your power. So they're the worst kind of friend because they're not even confident enough bullies to be bullies on their own. They have to hide behind another bully and be sub-bullies, and that's a dismal outcome. And then if you use power in your business relationships, it's like no one's going to be aligned with you, and the first time you make a mistake, and you show any sign of weakness, your so-called business associates that you've just dominated because you have the power, they're just going to stab you in the back and leave. So it's a preposterous theory. It doesn't even work for chimpanzees. So the best work that's been done on chimps so far has been done by Franz de Waal. De Waal has been studying chimpanzees for 3 decades, and he's written a series of books about the emergence of proto-morality in chimpanzees. Now, chimps have to live in a social group, and for decades, and they have, you might as well call them friendships, because that's the closest analog, and they have to maintain those friendships. And they can't maintain them by dominance because, well, then obviously it's not a friendship. They have to maintain it by mutual grooming and caretaking. And so what de Waal has shown is that the alpha chimp, so you think of the alpha chimp as the roughest, toughest chimp in the troop, you know, he's banging on sticks and threatening everybody, and he clambers his way up the hierarchy just like the Marxists would assume, and he establishes sexual superiority and propagates his genes. And the truth of the matter is, that's better than being weak and useless and dying, but it's not nearly as good as being genuinely reciprocal. And so what de Waal has shown is that sometimes the alpha chimp male is the smallest male in the troop, so that's pretty damn interesting. But more to the point, the alpha chimp is the most reciprocal member of the entire troop. So he's keeping track of his social relations. He's grooming his friends. They're interacting constantly, like he's maintaining social relationships like mad. And there's 2 advantages to that, apart from the fact that he attains a certain degree of a reverence, let's say, and authority, and some preferential sexual access. So it's a good biological strategy. The troop is also more stable emotionally, partly because it's not ruled by a tyrant, let's say, who's always disrupting things. But the alpha, who's reciprocal, also can have a long reign. Because if you're one of those chimps that use manipulation and power to climb up the hierarchy, as soon as you show a sign of weakness, 2 of the males that you've oppressed will gang together, which chimps are very good at, and tear you into bits. And so de Waal has written very frightening accounts, very graphic accounts of these like revolutions against tyranny in chimp groups. And so the people who claim that power is the only motivation, they don't have a leg to stand on. It's just not true. But I'll tell you something else that's really weird. I don't understand this either. So more than 90% of the people who watch my videos on YouTube are men. Now that's weird because about 80% of psychology students are women. So that is not what you would expect, right? You would expect that the majority of them would be women. And you might say, well, it's because of the political stance I've taken. And I thought, well, that's possible. So I went and looked at the demographic data because I have that. Well, before I did any of the political videos, 85% of my viewers were men. So it's actually increased a bit. It's increased by 6%. And that's not trivial, but it was still overwhelmingly men. So that was interesting. I thought, what the hell? Why is that exactly? And then now I've been watching crowds when I've been talking to them. And the crowds that have come to see me in person, This happened at the University of Toronto free speech debate. And I actually noticed it and commented on it before the debate took place, because I was talking about intrinsic differences between men and women. And I looked around the room and I thought, hey, 80% of the people in this room are men. So I had all the women stand up and then all the men stand up. I said, look, like, here's a natural experiment. For some reason, 80% of the people who showed up to this are men. Now, everybody thought I was kind of cracked to do that. And it was a risk, you know, but I thought, no, there's something going on here. And then what's interesting now is that every public appearance that I've made that's related to the sort of topics that we're discussing is overwhelmingly men. It's like 85 to 90%. And so I thought, wow, that's weird. Like, what the hell's going on here exactly? And then the other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? Because you can't have the bloody conversation. What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility, because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life. That's what it looks like to me. It's like, here you are, suffering away. What makes it worthwhile? Rights? You know, you're completely out. You have no idea what it's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there. Well, what's really cool about that is that when I talk to these crowds about this, the men's eyes light up. But this responsibility thing, that's a whole new order of this, is that young men are so hungry for that, it is unbelievable. I was watching The Simpsons the other day. I watched the first Simpsons episode, and I deconstructed it. And so it's really interesting. So what happens in the first Simpson episode is that it's Christmas, and Homer and Marge are going to buy some Christmas presents, but Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus. And so he's absolutely crushed by that. And that actually is a recurring theme in The Simpsons, where Homer loses his job or something like that, or can't make enough money. He's completely crushed. Even though he's kind of useless, bumbling, laughing fool of a guy, you know, the thing that gives that show its soul is that he's still oriented towards his family. That's what makes him honorable, is that foolish as he is, he's decided to adopt responsibility for his family and to try to bear that. And so he's a holy fool. He's not a complete fool. And it's so interesting watching the story because he suffers dreadfully as a consequence of not being able to fulfill his responsibility. Well, that's for men. Women have their sets of responsibilities. They're not the same, right? Because they're complicated, because women, of course, have to take primary responsibility for having infants at least, but then also for caring for them. They're structured differently than men. For biological necessity, even if it's not a psychological issue, and it's also partly a psychological issue. Women know what they have to do. Men have to figure out what they have to do. And if they have nothing worth living for, then they stay Peter Pan. And why the hell not? Because the alternative to valued responsibility is impulsive, low-class pleasure.
Met some of your fans, and we got the impression they were all male fans, the ones that we talked to, and that they were struggling with their manhood, and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines. In the storms and the rain, they're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning, this thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they act properly and honestly and forthrightly, that they can put their lives together and they can help their families